The shotgun blast shattered the birthday celebration like thunder splitting a summer sky. Every soul at the Copper Ridge farmhouse froze as Martha Whitmore stood silhouetted in the doorway, smoke still curling from the barrel she'd aimed at the ceiling. Her calico dress, once pristine for the occasion, now bore the dust of her desperate ride across the mesa. Her dark hair, usually pinned with military precision, hung wild around shoulders that had carried the weight of 7 years' worth of silent suffering. "Nobody moves," she commanded, her voice cutting through the stunned silence like a blade through silk. "Not until you hear what I have to say about the man you're all here celebrating." The room held its breath. Thomas Whitmore, her husband of 7 bitter years, stood frozen beside his towering birthday cake, his face draining of color like water from a broken dam. His mother, Eleanor Whitmore, dropped her crystal champagne flute, the sound of shattering glass punctuating the moment like a death knell. But it was too late for silence now, far too late. 3 hours earlier, Martha had been on her knees in the kitchen, scrubbing flour from the floorboards where Eleanor had accidentally knocked over the canister while Martha prepared her son's favorite apple cake. The older woman stood over her like a general surveying a defeated army, her lips pursed in perpetual disapproval. "Honestly, Martha," Eleanor had sneered, her voice dripping with disdain that could have frozen the Rio Grande in August. "In my day, a proper wife would have anticipated such mishaps. Perhaps if you spent less time daydreaming, and more time attending to your duties." Martha's knuckles had gone white around the scrub brush. 7 years of these moments crashed over her like an avalanche. 7 years of being treated like hired help in her own home, of watching Thomas nod along with his mother's criticism, of swallowing her pride until it sat in her stomach like a stone. "Yes, ma'am," she had whispered, the words tasting like ash. Eleanor's satisfied smile had been sharp enough to cut glass. "Now when you're finished with your mess, the guests will be arriving soon. I trust you'll remember to stay in the background where you belong. This is Thomas's night after all." As Martha had scrubbed, her mind had wandered to the locked drawer in Thomas's study, to the papers she'd discovered 3 days ago while cleaning. Papers that had made her blood run cold and her world crumble like a house built on sand. Now standing in that doorway with the shotgun still warm in her hands, Martha felt the weight of those 7 years transforming into something else entirely, into fury that burned hotter than the desert sun, into determination that ran deeper than the deepest well. "Thomas Whitmore," she announced to the room full of neighbors, friends, and family, "is not the man you think he is." Thomas found his voice, though it cracked like a teenage boy's. "Martha, please, you're clearly overwrought. Perhaps you should sit down." The command came out with such authority that Thomas actually stumbled backward into his chair. Martha had discovered something in herself during that ride across the mesa, something that had been buried under years of yes ma'ams and swallowed words. She reached into her dress pocket with her free hand, never lowering the shotgun, and withdrew a bundle of papers tied with string. The documents crackled in the sudden silence like kindling in a fire. 3 days ago, she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the room, while cleaning Thomas's study, "You know, the one I'm forbidden from entering except to dust and scrub. I found these papers, hidden away like guilty secrets." Eleanor's face had gone from pale to purple. "How dare you rifle through private documents? Thomas, control your wife immediately." But Martha was beyond control now, beyond the reach of sharp words and sharper looks. She was a wildfire that had been smoldering for 7 years, and now she was burning free. "These papers," she continued, holding them up like evidence at a trial, "show that my dear husband here sold the northern pasture, you know, the one that borders the canyon pass, to Black Jack Morrison's gang." The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Black Jack Morrison was a name whispered in fear throughout the territory, a man whose gang had terrorized homesteaders and robbed stages with impunity. "That's impossible," called out Samuel Chen, Thomas's supposed best friend. "Thomas would never." $5,000, Martha cut him off, her voice rising above the din. 5,000 pieces of silver for land that gives Morrison's boys the perfect hideout and escape route, after they robbed the Denver stage twice a month. Thomas had gone from pale to green, like a man facing the gallows. "Martha, you don't understand. I had debts, gambling debts," she shouted, and the words hit the room like physical blows. "While I scraped together pennies to buy flour and sugar, while his mother berated me for not keeping house well enough, Thomas was losing our future at poker tables in Silver Creek." The crowd was murmuring now, a low rumble of shock and disbelief. Martha could see the doubt creeping into their faces, the way they looked at Thomas like they were seeing him for the first time. Eleanor stepped forward, her face twisted with rage. "You ungrateful hysterical. Sit down, Eleanor." Martha's voice could have cut steel. "For once in your miserable life, sit down and be quiet." The older woman actually stumbled backward as if she'd been slapped. In all the years of their acquaintance, no one had ever spoken to Eleanor Whitmore with such authority. Martha continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. Do you want to know what the worst part is? It's not the gambling. It's not even selling our land to murderers and thieves. It's that while Thomas was making these deals, I was on my knees scrubbing floors and being told I wasn't worthy of sitting at my own dinner table. Tears of rage streaked down her cheeks, but her voice never wavered. Every morning for 7 years I've been treated like a servant in my own home. Every evening, I've listened to lectures about my failures as a wife, while my husband counted money earned from betraying our neighbor. She turned to address the crowd directly. How many of you have lost money to Morrison's gang? How many of your friends and family have been robbed on that Denver road? The silence was deafening. Several people shifted uncomfortably, and Martha could see the awful recognition dawning in their faces. Thomas's land made it all possible, she continued relentlessly. Every robbery, every terrified traveler, every family that lost their life savings, it all happened because my husband needed money to pay off gambling debts. He was too much of a coward to confess. Thomas finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Martha, please, I never meant for anyone to get hurt. Morrison said they'd just use it for camping. Lies. The word exploded from her like a gunshot. These papers show you knew exactly what they planned to do. There are maps, Tom. Maps showing the stage routes, marked with the best ambush points. She pulled out another document, her hands shaking now with the weight of her revelation. And this one shows the percentage you get from each robbery. Blood money, Tom. You've been living off blood money while letting your mother treat me like dirt. The room was dead silent now, except for the sound of someone quietly crying. Martha realized with surprise that it wasn't her, it was Eleanor, finally understanding the magnitude of what her precious son had done. I've endured 7 years of being invisible, Martha continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more power than her shouts. 7 years of being told I wasn't good enough, smart enough, worthy enough, and all the while I was married to a man who sells out his neighbors to thieves. She straightened her shoulders and everyone in the room could see the transformation. This wasn't the same woman who had scrubbed floors that morning. This was someone entirely new, forged in the fire of her own righteous anger. So here's what's going to happen, she announced, her voice clear and strong. I'm leaving Thomas Whitmore tonight, and I'm taking these papers to Sheriff Davidson first thing tomorrow morning. Thomas lurched to his feet. Martha, you can't. I'm your husband. You were never my husband, she replied with devastating calm. A husband protects his wife. He honors her. He doesn't let his mother treat her like a servant while he counts blood money in his study. She turned to Eleanor, who was now slumped in her chair like a broken doll. And you, Eleanor Whitmore, can clean your own house from now on. Find yourself another servant to boss around, because I'm— Martha backed toward the door, the shotgun still ready, her eyes never leaving Thomas's face. You want to know the real tragedy here? If you'd treated me like a partner instead of a slave, I might have helped you find another way. But you chose to lie, to gamble, to sell out your neighbors, and to let your mother crush what little spirit I had left. She reached the doorway, and paused, looking back at the room full of stunned faces. I'll be staying at the Palmer boarding house until the sheriff sorts this out. Anyone who wants to know the truth about Black Jack Morrison's success can find me there. As she turned to leave, Thomas called out desperately, Martha, please, where will you go? How will you survive? She paused without turning around, and when she spoke, her voice carried a strength that surprised even her. I've been surviving on scraps of dignity for 7 years, Thomas. I think I can manage just fine without you. The last thing the party guests heard was the sound of hoofbeats fading into the desert night, carrying Martha Whitmore toward a future she would write herself. 3 months later, the Denver newspapers would report the capture of Black Jack Morrison's entire gang, thanks to evidence provided by a brave woman whose testimony led to the largest criminal conviction in territorial history. Thomas Whitmore received 20 years in prison, and Eleanor was forced to sell the farm to pay restitution to his victims. As for Martha, she used the reward money to buy a small spread near Silver Creek, where she raised horses and never scrubbed another floor for anyone but herself. The locals said she smiled more in those first few months of freedom than she had in 7 years of marriage. But on quiet evenings when the desert wind whispered through the canyon, some swore they could still hear the echo of that shotgun blast, the sound of a woman finally finding her voice, and refusing to be silenced ever again. The question that haunted everyone who heard the story wasn't whether Martha had done the right thing. It was how many other women were out there, scrubbing floors and swallowing their words, married to men whose secrets were darker than the desert night. And perhaps more importantly, what would it take for them to find the courage to pick up their own metaphorical shotgun and demand the truth.